What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are here to talk about the Detroit Lions a little bit, and we're going to be talking about a possible free agent target for the Detroit Lions. He has been named an ideal fit according to ESPN. This will be our second free agent profile video. We did one on Jordan Whitehead. I know there's another guy that we're going to have to do very soon as well. But also, I had some notes from what Anthony Lynn said about his time with the Detroit Lions that, kind of caught my eye. I thought they were interesting, so I wanted to share them with you guys.
The city's been down and it found a way to get up. And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up. And then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down. We're going to take another hunk out of you. Before long, we're going to be the last one standing.
Welcome everybody to another video. Glad you guys are here. And of course, we're going to be talking about another free agent target today. This is our second free agent profile video, but this was a guy that was kind of tagged to the Detroit Lions, and a lot of people have been talking. And since you guys brought up in a stream, I was like, all right, we have to do a video on this. There's another guy that I want to talk about soon too, because I saw some rumors that the Lions could be interested in him when it hits free agency, which I believe the signings, for these guys, day 1, day 2, starts on March 16th. But March 14th, you can start talking to these players that are going to become free agents. Now, before that, of course, we're going to have re-signings and things like that, just like Jason Kabinda yesterday. If you didn't see that short video, it was a short one. I know we mixed it up. Check it out if you guys want to. Jason Kabinda has been re-signed, but it's only about 4 weeks before this really starts going down. So as many players as we can fit into this, that's great. That works for me. And since this guy has been talked about a ton recently, we might as well do a video on it. But also Anthony Lynn. He was our offensive coordinator last season. He was kind of taken away of his play calling duties halfway through the season, and Dan Campbell became the guy to call plays. However, he spoke about his time with the Detroit Lions last season, and he had a couple of notes in there that really stuck out to me, and I want to share those with you guys before we get into the free agent profile side of things, kind of like we've been doing with these draft profile videos. There was a few answers in here that we've already kind of hit on, why certain things happened this past season. I mean, he was asked, what really changed in the second half of the season? Why were the Lions able to start closing games? And, what he pointed out was getting Taylor Decker back was huge. Getting Josh Reynolds was a massive addition. And then, of course, the emergence of a guy like Monroe St. Brown within that offense. And we've hit on that so much, I feel like we've almost overhit on it. So I'm not going to really go into that. Of course, also having these young guys with their experience, understanding the situation a little bit better. What stuck out to me is what he said about the top, the ownership, because this is something that we hit on in one of our recent streams on Rad's channel. I think it was Monday's show. So if you guys didn't see that, check out Last Second Sports. We did a show on Monday and we hit on the ownership, and because I've been diving into it recently, because that's where it really does start. It starts at the top with making your hirings, then keeping those guys around because you made the right hirings, and it really all does trickle down from the top. Really, our last few regimes that we've had have kind of ended in a weird way. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily those guys that we've had should have been here longer, but of course, it does start with the hiring the right guy, and there was a lot of excitement about the way that Sheila Ford Hamp approached that. I mean, really, as an owner, if you can't hire the right guy, that's your main job, is to hire the right people. So if you can't do that, really, what are you doing as an owner, right? You're the problem at that point if you can't do that. And Sheila Ford Hamp, took it upon herself to be extremely involved this offseason, which was exciting. She had guys like Chris Spielman help her out, things like that, other, people in the management to help her find the right guy. And now apparently she's been heavily involved. But the biggest step for her was hiring the people that not maybe were the right guy, but necessarily just the guys that she believes are the right guys for the Detroit Lions. I mean, that's the first step. And we know our last hirings of a Bob Quinn was a recommendation hire. Clay Ford passing away, rest in peace. And then Martha Ford took over. And then you see the year later, she clears house around Jim Caldwell. So at that point, you have, a new general manager coming in, a new team president coming in. And, Jim Caldwell spoke about this in the past. He's like, yeah, when that happened, you kind of had the feeling that I was going to be out. Now, again, I'm not saying he should have been here longer. That's not what I'm saying. But that ended a couple years later as Bob Quinn fired Jim Caldwell, and then he went out and hired his guy. But the initial hiring of Bob Quinn was a recommendation to the Detroit Lions for Martha Ford, and she went based off of that. So then they have this new regime in here. You got this, Patriot Way, the Bob Quinns, the Matt Patricias. Then you're going through that, and Martha Ford steps down. So Sheila Ford Hamp takes over in 2020. She sees the results aren't where she wants them to be. So she fires those two during the season. And that moves us on to this current regime. And you have to hope as a fan that her, finding the guy that she wants course, will lead to good things that, she's, of course, giving them everything they need to be successful, but also understanding their future, goal, their plan, what they're trying to get to and how they're going to try to get there. That way you can actually see a little bit deeper than just the wins and losses, just that side of it, because there's a lot of factors that can play into that. But Anthony Lynn touched on this and it really stuck out to me. He said this, he's so impressed with the ownership when he first got here because, he said he didn't really know a ton of the coaches, but it was more about, he knew Brad Holmes, he knew Ray Agnew. So he came in, right? It was looking like maybe Anthony Lynn wasn't even a coach this season, but he comes in to work with the Detroit Lions. And, he talked a lot about the leadership being a very good part of this team and keeping the locker room together, because even though we were losing, the leadership was fantastic. We heard when Dom Capers left, he said, the arrow is pointing up. He said they laid the foundation for future success, and I fully expect that to happen. He was asked about like drafting a quarterback, and he's like, well, they got Tim Boyle and they got David Blau, even though we know that they're both free agents. I mean, I can see Tim Boyle coming back. I don't really see David Blau coming back, but he brought up those two guys. He said you didn't see much of Tim Boyle this season because he was hurt, and then of course until the Pittsburgh game when he had a week to practice and he comes in and he plays. And then he said even David Blau may deserve some opportunities, but I don't really think David Blau's coming back. I could see a possibility where Tim Boyle comes back, but we know that both those guys are free agents. That was something that I wanted to point out, what he said about the ownership. She's that invested where she believes in their future plan. She can see the vision for it, give them every tool that they need to be successful. That way, because it is her guys, and that hasn't always been the case with some of the ownership in the time of the firing where it was their guy that they necessarily fired. Hopefully that makes a difference this time around. I mean, that's the hope. Now let's talk about this free agent, this receiver out of Arizona named Christian Kirk. Pretty much seeing this everywhere is that Christian Kirk is the ideal fit for the Detroit Lions in free agency. This is the ideal landing spot for a guy like Christian Kirk and for the Detroit Lions. Now, we do expect the Lions are going to sign somebody in free agency. That could be a re-signing of a Josh Reynolds, a Khalif Raymond, someone else. It could be multiple signings in free agency, but we do expect at least one just based on what Antoine Randall L said alone. I would love to bring back Josh Reynolds, but that wouldn't mean that they can't make another move in free agency. Now, the Lions do have a little bit of money to spend. We're looking at, around like $20 million in cap space. Of course, they can save some of that by making some moves, restructuring some contracts, giving out some pay cuts, maybe to a big V, finding a way to move on from a guy like Trey Flowers. There's ways that they can also save money. They don't have a ton of money to spend, but they do have some money, and they are in a better position than about half of the teams in the National Football League, at least as of right now. We did do this recent video, where we talked about how the Rams got to where they were and how they attacked free agency. So that is part of it. So keep that in mind. If you guys have not seen that video, definitely go check it out. The Rams have done it with Brad Holmes was there. This is the way they approached free agency with a lot of short-term deals, plugging holes. And then, of course, after that, going through the draft. And then eventually it got to the trade phase. So if you guys want to check out the video, it is a little bit on the longer side, but we dove into a lot of stuff there. So I think you get a nice little feel of everything, all the aspects of the offseason, not only free agency, but also the draft and also even the trade side of it as well. Christian Kirk, he's set to become a free agent. I think many Cardinals fans believe that he could end up being a free agent and not re-signed by their team because they did draft recently Rondale Moore in the second round, and he can play that slot position, which is where Christian Kirk played most of his snaps last season. 79% of his snaps last season came at the slot position versus his previous high, which was about 41% of his snaps coming at the slot receiver position. So he pretty much took over that role, which made sense because of some of the receivers that they had around there. This past season, they had DeAndre Hopkins, of course, but then they also brought in AJ Green. So you had two outside guys. So he plugged into the slot role, and he went on to have a career season. He put up almost 1,000 yards. And I know guys like DeAndre Hopkins, they were rooting for him to hit 1,000 yards. He played in all 17 games, which is nice. Started 11 of those, had 77 receptions, 982 yards, and 5 touchdowns, while also putting up a 112 pass rating when the ball was thrown his direction. Plus, he caught 74.8% of passes that were technically targeted to him, which is a very high catch rate. And now he's projected to get a pretty nice deal from somebody because he is coming off career season, because he's only 25 years old, because he is a former second-round pick. I've seen that he is projected, and this number is according to Pro Football Focus. They are projecting him to get about a 3-year, $35 million deal with about $24 million guaranteed. That doesn't mean that's going to be his contract. That's just what's projected. Now, this kind of contract would be like the first year that Brad Holmes and Sean McVay, were there when Sean McVay was there, when they went out and signed a Robert Woods. That's kind of the feel I got from seeing this idea originally, because you're talking about a guy that's similar size. Robert Woods, of course, has become a big player for them. I think it's given him extension since then. So I thought about him immediately as this could be that kind of signing. And of course, if you get him under 3 years, you could push money back a little bit more. Now, you don't want to backload heavy. That's not something that the Rams have done or Brad Holmes was a part of a ton. But there is ways that you could save a little bit more money this season if you did want to do something like this, because that's about a little bit less than $12 million per year if you go by that contract. So it's pretty expensive. So the question is he worth it? And would he fit within this offense? Now, from the articles that I've read saying that he's the ideal fit, of course they believe he's going to fit in this offense. That's why they said he's an ideal fit. They said, you look at the slot snaps, you may think, okay, well, he won't fit with Amon-Ra St. Brown, but he can also play on the outside. Specifically, previous years, he's played more on the outside. So having the ability to do both, they can plug in and play next to each other. And I've kind of, after watching a lot from 2021 and then also getting into some of this 2020 film, I can see what they're talking about, and I can understand how on paper this could make sense. Let's talk a little bit about who Christian Kirk is. He wore the number 13, so I'll start there. 25 years old, former second-round pick, as you said, 5'11", 200-pound receiver. I've also seen some people list him at 6 foot, so, just depending on who you look at there, which means he's not short. Khalif Raheem was 5'8". Was definitely like a differential in height there. Christian Kirk is a little bit shorter than Quintez Cephas. He's about the same height as a Robert Woods. So he's not a small receiver. He's just not a big receiver either. He's just kind of in the middle there. He's a little bit shorter than Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's 6'1", 185. So he's just kind of in that range. Khalif Raheem was definitely on the shorter side, and I thought that helped him a ton as a route runner. Not to take anything away from him as a route runner, but he was electric running one-on-one and trying to beat man coverage. He was so tough to cover, but he was also 5'8". Christian Kirk came out of the draft. He ran a 4.47 40-yard time. He put up 20 bench press reps, which definitely speaks to some of his strength, for sure, some of the physicality that he can play with. I believe St. Brown put up 15, and you see it in his game. He may not have the mold and big built guy, but he definitely can play with some physicality. So what would his role be? Well, like I said, last season he was mainly a slot because some of the guys that they had, and he's always been around receivers like that in Arizona. Even before this past season, it was Larry Fitzgerald and it was DeAndre Hopkins in 2020, so you still kind of had top two guys above him. Sort of like the Khalif Raymond situation, a little bit less though, because he still found ways to hit the field. And where that really stuck with me was off of the press. We didn't see it very much. So what would his role be? Well, like I said, last season he was mainly a slot because some of the guys that they had, and he's always been around receivers like that in Arizona. Even before this past season, it was Larry Fitzgerald and it was DeAndre Hopkins in 2020, so you still kind of had top two guys above him. Sort of like the Khalif Raymond situation, a little bit less though, because he still found ways to hit the field. It's just that last year was his career season statistically. His role was more of the slot slash when he did play on the outside. I think most of his outside snaps, they like to keep him off the line of scrimmage, and they got creative with it. You could see it. They like to get him in bunches sometimes, get him off the line, sometimes put him in a stack receiver position to get him off the line of scrimmage certain ways. Now, we have seen him motion, get behind the line of scrimmage. I've seen him line up in the backfield as a running back. So he kind of has that similar type of feel to Amon-Ra St. Brown, where Z receiver slash slot receiver, where he could play both kind of those roles. I wouldn't get him and be like, okay, this is our X. He's going to get up a line. He's going to beat one-on-one. He's fit. He just doesn't have the build for it necessarily. That's not to say he doesn't play with some physicality. He did do pretty well with his quick feet, but I just don't think he's built to be your pure X receiver. But that could be opened up in the draft, or with a Quintez Cephas, or with a Josh Reynolds possibly returning, or someone else in free agency. There's different ways to fill that role. But the question is, $12 million a year almost, is he worth that kind of contract? That's what it really does come down to. So let's talk about this receiver a little bit. What I take away from film. I did watch a lot more 2021, but I also watched a few games from 2020 as well. Try to get the feel from different positions where he was lining up. Off the release, we'll start there. I won't go too deep into this, but he did show some physicality. I think he really wins with that quick feet, with his quick feet off the release. That's how he gets off the release consistently. What sticks out, but a lot of times they have him off the line of scrimmage, so he doesn't have to deal with press and things like that. He is getting bumped at the line of scrimmage. He does have a little bit of physicality, but he mainly seems to win with his foot quickness. He can have some issues working off man press coverage and getting a lot of separation, and this can also show up working against man coverage on the outside. Very effective against zone, but working on the outside against man coverage, especially if they're going to get him big physical with him, he can be pretty inefficient at getting much separation at all. And while he has good speed, it's not scary speed. He can be kind of ineffective on some of these routes. But sometimes it's just really good ball placement, dropping into the bucket, not much separation. Like the one we saw from Khalif in the LA game from Goff. I think that's part of the reason he was so dominant working from the slot position, is because you have a guy like Hopkins and you have an AJ Green working from the slot, being able to get some of those routes outside. Showed a lot of promise working underneath the middle of the field. He was one of the best slot receivers in the National Football League last season, so I won't take that away from him. But there is some inefficiencies working against press and getting some space. He has won some routes deep. A lot of times, though, it's breaking down zone coverage rather than beating man coverage when he's working on the outside. I absolutely love about him as a route runner, and he's one of the best I've seen at doing this. He seems to make a lot of his money when attacking the boundaries of the field, the sidelines. He is fantastic, and you can line him up wide, especially if he gets to play against off coverage. He can run from the slot and work outside. He does a really good job, especially against zone coverage, at attacking the blind spot of a cornerback and working the sidelines, working comeback routes, any kind of routes to the sideline back to the football. He is outstanding at doing this, attacking the blind spot, breaking down, and getting back to the football. This is one of the most efficient type of routes that he can run when working on the outside. However, there definitely still are concerns with him when he is getting pressed. As a route runner, being a little bit lower to the ground is beneficial for him, but he's a pretty good route runner from what I took away. He does a really good job using head fakes to try to sell routes. I mean, a majority of it. Sometimes I think he could flip his hips a little bit more and, do a little bit more to sell routes. Sometimes guys don't bite because he does just kind of turn his head and then he moves back the other way. He could sell a little bit more because some guys are just looking at your stomach. So you could sell that a little bit more than he does, but he uses his head a lot to try to get a little bit of space and sell different routes. I think being low to the ground does benefit him a little bit, being able to change directions. He changed directions very fluidly at his size, being a little bit lower to the ground, not being like 6'4", but I don't want to take that away from his route running. Plus, he also does a pretty nice job of working back to the football. The ability to kind of step on the brakes, go from 100 to 0 pretty fast without having to beat the drum too often. He also doesn't really give a tell to it. You don't see him start to stand up. He can do it all within one motion, but that seemed to be where you have a lot of success, is those spot up kind of routes where he could sit down, work back to the football, comeback routes, curl routes, spotting up over the middle of the field. Routes like that, sitting down on the sideline, any kind of sit down routes where he could come back to the ball is where he had a lot of production that stuck out for sure. And he is a fantastic job of making himself a target. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to get back to this route running. He's more of a, to me, he's more of a pacing receiver rather than a burner. Now, that's not to say he's slow. He came out, ran a 4.47 coming out of the draft. Definitely has top end speed. There were a few times where he took the top off. I don't know if I'd say he has Khalif speed, but when you pair it with having about, 3-4 more inches in height on him, he's got some speed to get over the top. I've seen him, go against off coverage, chew up some ground pretty quickly, some cover threes, get some inside leverage, use the head fake, and he can get on top of defenders. I mean, he is nowhere near slow. He's not elite speed, but he's got good speed. Be a tad slower than Khalif, but at the same time, he's a little bit of a bigger target. So he definitely has that top end speed, but the way he seems to win as a route runner seemingly is pacing. And this is where he thrives, and I think it helped him thrive a ton when playing the slot receiver position, the pacing within his routes. Now again, don't mistake that for him being slow, because he does give threats to defensive backs, right? Especially if they're trying to play off coverage, you'll see them, they'll have to dial back because he can get over top if you bite down low. However, it's pacing that's up his routes, and I thought we really saw it expanded as a slot working the middle of the field, slowing down into holes, slowing down in certain spots of his route, able to change directions at a very fluid motion where there's some long routes, some long-winded routes. He doesn't have to change speed. He can run it out route at the same speed the whole way through without having to slow down or give kind of any tells coming out of break. But it really showed off was working the middle of the field. You saw it on some seams. They try to hit him up, get some shots there. You saw him also working, just spotting up underneath. But then that moves me on to pass catching. And he's one of the more reliable pass catchers. Now, this past season, he was accounted for having a 7.6% drop rate, which is a little high. It's a little high, but he also had 77 receptions, so keep that in mind. It's a little high, though. However, he does seem to have extremely reliable hands for the most part. That's what sticks out. And it's before he even gets the ball. Like I said, what he does a real nice job of is creating space. Off schedule, he was excellent, terrific, I would say. Terrific at making himself a target for quarterbacks spotting up, and he's also not afraid to get contact once he touches the football. He's not afraid of contact, because where he really excels as a pass catcher is the immediate catch to tuck. He immediately catches the ball and tucks it and puts it away to protect it. He has success working in the middle of the field, working underneath, taking a hit on some of those short underneath routes, but being a reliable pass catcher that's usually going to catch the ball and keep the chains moving. So that is nice, is that he's pretty reliable, and he makes himself a pretty nice target for quarterbacks by constantly working into their field of vision. A little bit of limited range with his arm length, not the longest arm. Some balls can get a little bit out of his radius. It's a little bit bigger than Khalif's, and we saw sometimes with Khalif, you had to be kind of money on some of those, hole shots. You saw that a little bit with Khalif. He's got a little more range than that, but, he can be a little bit limited where some passes, if they're 2-3 yards, away, he may not be able to get all the way fully onto the football. So he can be late with his hands, and that can be a good thing. But underneath, specifically, when you have to be a reliable pass catcher, there are a few times where he's late with his hands at getting him up, and he'll catch the ball a little late. He'll let it get to his body. But it is something to keep note of, is that he lets the ball get to his body a few more times than you would like, especially working underneath, which can allow some of those defenders to get hands on it and break passes up. But I also do like him attacking downfield here. Like the last receiver took a look at, Justin Ross, his field awareness seems to be very good. He works the sidelines extremely well, constantly gets 2 feet inbounds, works the sidelines really well, can make plays, of course, in the air, still getting his feet down on the sideline. His field awareness is really good in that respect. He also can scoop some passes off the ground. He has some pretty nice body control. We see it as a route runner. He is very efficient at sinking his hips into comebacks and curls and working back to the football, but he's a pretty effective, body control receiver, so that even passes that are low, he can kind of sink down, get to the ground, and make a play on them. Also, balls that are over top, he can get up in the air and make a play for the football. So he's overall, I would say, a pretty darn reliable pass catcher that's proven, a pretty proven reliable pass catcher. He hasn't really seen, like this season, I think, he had 103 targets. That's a lot. He hasn't seen that in the past, but from what we can tell, what we've gathered so far, he's a pretty darn reliable pass catcher. Not perfect, but pretty darn good in this area. Right after the catch, this is a spot where I was a little bit disappointed. I was kind of hoping for more here. I thought he'd be more dangerous. Sometimes the roll plays into this. Like, he caught a lot of screens, which I think is where he actually did rack up a lot of his yards after catch. Plus, when you're sitting down a lot underneath, it's going to push down your yards after catch because you're just catch, fall. It's like you're only picking up 4 yards, but there's not much you can do after that. So, that can limit the yards, but it was a little bit disappointing. He didn't really seem to do anything special once the ball was in his hands. Seemed to fear the defense at all. One thing I did like is that since he catches and immediately tucks passes when he's working seams, things like that, there's no delay between catch, tuck, settle, and then run. It's catch, tuck, go, and it's very fluid, very smooth, but there's not much that scares you when the ball's in his hands. The speed, it's good. It can be good. Like, if there was no one near him, he could probably score, right? But it's not scary. He's not super elusive. I really didn't see him make any kind of moves, and there's much more bigger receivers that are much more elusive than he was. So there's that. And then he doesn't really ever break tackles, like ever. He had 1 in each of the last 4 years. Average 3 yards per run after catch, which is probably the area I was the most disappointed. I was hoping for more here. That way I could be like, oh, wow, he can be really dangerous on screens. He just didn't seem dangerous. They threw a lot to him, but there really wasn't a fear factor when the ball was in his hand. So I was a little bit let down by some of the production that I thought I was going to see in that area. How does this guy's role fit? Well, I think he would kind of plug in if you sign him to that Khalif Raymond role, because if you look at Khalif Raymond, he came into the year, he's one of our top 2 receivers. He'd probably plug the role of playing a Z receiver / slot receiver. A lot of comfortability in bunches, stacks, things like that. Him and St. Brown could absolutely be on the field at the same time, especially when we go like 4 wide and we put St. Brown in the slot. We used to put Khalif there. You could put both those guys on the field at the same time, put them both in the slot, and they'd be dangerous. He has a really good job of getting open, and St. Brown, that's one of his biggest strengths too. Reliable pass catcher that can work seams, get open. He's really good at that as well, and he plays with a lot of physicality and toughness. So they both have some good things that can really bounce off each other and work well together. So there is a little bit of limitation here to have both the guys on this field at the same time if you go like 2 receiver sets. You could do it. You look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, and, there's only so many passes to go around. We didn't throw the ball a ton at the end of the year, so that's part of it. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, when he started becoming Amon-Ra St. Brown, like really Chicago on, and he went to go 80 yards, 90 yards, 100 yards, he was going crazy week after week after week. We really saw Khalif Raymond. Not only did his production dip big time, but also so did his snap counts. We started to see less and less and less of Khalif Raymond. Look at it from the Chicago game on. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 55 receptions, which was about 8 a game, and also 570 yards, which is 81 yards a game. However, Khalif Raymond on the other side from Chicago on had 18 receptions, which is 2.5 per game, and 213 yards, which is 30 yards per game. However, about 70 of those yards came on the one trick play we had against Green Bay. His production pretty much fell off a cliff. Not to say he was killing it early in the season, but he became a very tiny part of this offense. The others, as a blocker, he's not the best blocker. I saw him whiff a few times, but he absolutely has the physicality to do so. He just wasn't always consistent at, meeting the defender, but he was asked to do a lot. You saw some cut blocks, him hit some safeties. Absolutely plays with the effort and mentality to do it. He just is not a great blocker. And for this team, they may pass a little bit more than they did at the end of last season, but I don't think it's going to be a ton more. There's that to keep in mind. There's just only so much ball to go around. It is a nice piece to have because if something happened, you could play them at different spots. They could absolutely both be on the field when you spread them out, when you go into the gun, things like that. It's just that when you have 2 receivers on the field at the same time, you may be taking someone off the field, because I also don't think St. Brown is an X receiver, right? I don't view him as that either. So there just is that to keep in mind. And for that kind of price point, it feels a little high. It does. $13 million, $12 million a year feels high. He's not your typical big body, fast, take the top off type receiver like Tyrell Williams was to play that Z receiver position. To me, he's more of an effective underneath intermediate route he started to show, while also occasionally some sideline attacking, middle of the field type of player that has pretty darn reliable hands. A little bit let down with yards after the catch, but he does have a punt returning background, so he can bring that to the table as well. And he's a versatile piece. He and St. Brown could absolutely find their way on the field at the same time together. The biggest thing is scheme's going to be extremely important here. If they play like a short passing game type of style next season, then he could absolutely fit that, especially if you're going to continuously spread out defenses. He could without a doubt fit that kind of offense. I am a little bit concerned about his straight up man coverage beating ability, but there is some there. He's just not going to be your X receiver. Look, you need weapons next season, so I would have no issue if the Lions made this signing, because they need weapons and he is a weapon. I don't know if I could convince myself that I feel comfortable with $12 million a year, though, about $12 million a year after watching him play. I can't necessarily go there, but we do need weapons. So if the Lions wanted to make something like this happen, I'm going to be on board with it, because I believe the Lions will attack weapons. And plus, getting a guy like this, you can hit the draft then, whether that's you want to go get more of a prototypical X, you want to go get more of a big body, take off the top type of receiver, you can do those things throughout the draft for sure. But this is a good player. I think he could be effective in this offense, but if they did it, I wouldn't necessarily be mad. It's just I wouldn't call it a perfect fit for that kind of price tag. Let me know your thoughts, comments below. Do you think the Lions should sign him, and how much should they give him? Is that too much? I don't know. You let me know. We'll see what they do. March 16th, we should start seeing this stuff go down. Thank you, Pride, for watching, and I'm out.